They know you're not really hungry. That's why they took the others." The whisper hit Julian Vance's ear like a shard of ice. He flinched, pulling the ragged blanket tighter over his expensive watch, which he had tried to obscure with dirt. He was sitting on a cold grate in the shadow of the finance district, surrounded by genuine suffering. The girl who spoke, maybe 12, looked skeletal but sharp. Her eyes were fixed not on him, but on a black van idling half a block away. Julian, the CEO of Vance Global, had spent 48 hours undercover for a documentary, searching for raw authenticity. This wasn't authenticity. This was a direct threat he hadn't budgeted for. He opened his mouth to dismiss her fear, but she gripped his arm, her small hand surprisingly strong. The van's engine revved once. They had been watching him the entire time. Julian Vance's morning routine usually began at 4:30 a.m., not shivering beneath a collapsing awning. By 5:00 a.m., he was typically in his climate-controlled private gym, watching global market reports flicker silently on the soundproof wall screens. Today, his gym was the toxic chill of the city air, and his market report was the distant siren wail. Julian had built Vance Global from a 3-person startup into a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate, all before his 35th birthday. He controlled networks, algorithms, and the financial fates of thousands. His authority was absolute, his public image pristine, the empathetic futurist, the innovator who believed in connecting the disconnected. He was here to film the prologue for his foundation's new initiative, a 2-week immersion designed to prove that empathy needed data, that homelessness was a fixable algorithm. His disguise was meticulously crafted by a Hollywood pro, thin layers of theatrical grime, contact lenses that dulled his sharp blue gaze, and an odor of stale sweat and neglect. He was invisible, which was the point. Yet sitting here, clutching a foam cup, the power felt theoretical, a ghost of his real life. He checked his wrist, forgetting for a moment the dirt covering the platinum watch. The signal from the discreet tracking device implanted in the casing was solid. His security detail knew his precise location, waiting for the extraction scheduled for midnight after the crucial interview with a genuine rough sleeper. Beneath the veneer of control, the documentary was more than a PR stunt. It was a desperate penance. 5 years ago, Julian's younger sister, Clara, had struggled with severe depression and addiction. He had tried to fix her with money, with specialists, with the cold efficiency he applied to every other problem. He had booked her into the most exclusive clinic, believing his financial power could secure her wellness. But the system had failed her, or rather, he had failed to truly see her. Clara had walked out one rainy afternoon and was found 3 weeks later, blocks from where Julian was now sitting, lost to the streets and the darkness they offered. He poured billions into social causes, not for charity, but to silence the incessant, gnawing guilt that whispered, "You connected the world, but you couldn't connect with her." Every single person on the street represented a second chance he never got to offer Clara. He needed this film to prove, maybe only to himself, that he understood the chaos she faced. The chill deepened, and Julian didn't know if it was the morning air or the memory of Clara's last, hollowed-out phone call. The girl who had whispered the warning was named Maya. She was 14, but looked smaller, hardened by 3 winters sleeping rough. Her armor was silence and the ability to disappear into the noise of the city. Maya's life was a brutal calculation of resource management, where to find clean water, which dumpster offered slightly less spoiled food, and most critically, which corners to avoid after dusk. Her limitations were physical, chronic hunger, exhaustion that clawed at her bones, but her sensitivity was sharp, born from constant vigilance. She moved with the predatory awareness of someone who understood that being overlooked was the only true safety. She wasn't alone. Tucked away in a drainage pipe beneath a disused railway line, Maya was protecting Leo, a 6-year-old boy whose mother had vanished 6 months prior. Leo had a fever most days and talked mainly in quiet, fragmented questions about trains and snow. Maya guarded him fiercely, acting as a silent, skeletal shield. Her biggest fear wasn't hunger, it was the black van. She had seen it before, weeks ago, always driving slowly through the same vulnerable districts, Always when someone, a newcomer, a quiet one, a person who asked too many questions, disappeared without a trace. She knew the rules of the street, unspoken but absolute. Never talk to the smooth ones, never accept help from a clean car, and never ever draw attention to the ones who were different. Julian Vance, even under the dirt, was different. His hands were too soft, his posture too straight when he thought no one was watching. He moved with the confidence of someone who had a home to return to. Maya knew the smell of people playing poor, and it smelled like danger. She didn't understand why the smooth ones were targeting the fakers, the ones doing research, but she knew one thing for certain. The black van wasn't looking for the truly lost. It was looking for the ones with connections, the ones who would leave a lucrative hole in the world. She knew something terrible was happening, a silent cull, and the CEO sitting next to her, oblivious and self-important, was about to walk right into the trap. Where are you watching from today? The second night of Julian's simulated homelessness brought a deluge of cold rain that made his high-tech, waterproofed rags cling miserably to his skin. His production crew, operating remotely from a secure van miles away, urged him via the tiny, nearly invisible earpiece to move to the planned shelter spot. Julian ignored them, drawn instead to the unusual silence in the usually chaotic alleyway. He saw Maya curled tight under a discarded billboard, shielding what he initially thought was just a bundle of blankets. Julian approached, motivated by a mix of documentary necessity and the low throb of his sister guilt. He pulled out the pre-packaged protein bar he was allowed to carry, a small clinical gesture of assistance. As he reached the shadow, the bundle shifted, revealing Leo's small, pale face. The boy was shivering violently, his breath rattling wetly in his chest. Julian's CEO mind immediately calculated the danger: hypothermia, pneumonia, sepsis. These weren't abstract statistics. This was immediate, critical failure of the social safety net. Maya looked up, her expression a mixture of profound suspicion and raw fatigue. She didn't reach for the bar. She stared at Julian's eyes, trying to reconcile the dirt and the desperation with the underlying, unshakable assurance that still lingered in his gaze. "He needs a doctor," Julian said, the words rusty from disuse. Maya only shook her head once, a decisive, ancient movement. "They take you," she whispered, her eyes flickering toward the street entrance of the alley. "They see you taking care of someone weak. They know you have something to lose. They want what you lose." Julian felt a strange flicker of respect, not for the insight, but for the raw courage of her vigilance. He realized she wasn't just afraid of the city, she was actively managing a complex risk matrix, and he was the unstable variable. He wanted to help Leo, but his internal programming screamed against exposing his identity or breaking character prematurely for the cameras. The need to get the shot and prove his hypothesis warred with the primal urge to protect the sick child. He compromised, placing the protein bar silently next to Maya, not forcing the interaction, and slowly retreating back into the rain. As he walked away, Julian glanced back. Maya hadn't touched the bar. She was just watching the mouth of the alley, a silent sentinel against the darkness she understood, a darkness Julian was only beginning to simulate. Something cold and deep settled in Julian's stomach. This interaction wasn't part of the script. Something was dangerously close to spilling over. The next morning, Julian was attempting to film a handheld segment near the abandoned docks, detailing the psychological toll of chronic hunger. He was delivering a practiced monologue on data correlation when Maya reappeared, not begging, but trailing him. She kept a perfect, unnerving distance of 40 feet, weaving through the morning rush with ghostly precision. Then she paused near a newly opened food bank, a brightly painted community initiative funded in part by a rival tech philanthropist. Julian observed her through the viewfinder of his concealed camera. Maya wasn't interested in the long line of people waiting for hot coffee. She was fixated on a black SUV idling across the street, not the van from before, but a sleek, expensive vehicle with tinted windows and official-looking plates. Suddenly, a well-dressed man, a volunteer from the food bank, Julian assumed, stepped out, carrying a large branded cooler. The man was friendly, handing out bottles of chilled water to the people in line, but Maya's small body tensed. Julian zoomed the camera slightly on the man's hands. The man smiled genuinely, but his eyes were flat, constantly scanning. Maya, with a startling burst of movement, darted forward. She didn't approach the man. She went to a rusted metal signpost nearby, pretending to scratch a deep itch. As the man turned his back momentarily, she moved with surgical precision, scraping a tiny, almost invisible sticker off the signpost with her thumbnail. Julian, watching on the small screen, saw the detail. A minimalist logo, a stylized letter R inside a diamond shape. He mentally dismissed it as cheap street tagging, or perhaps a delivery service decal. But Maya didn't dismiss it. She crushed the tiny sticker in her palm, her face etched with a fear far exceeding the risk of stealing a bottle of water. She looked back at Julian, her gaze piercing the grime and the lens. The message was clear. This is not normal. This is a marker. Julian felt the cold certainty of her fear. His data-driven mind tried to rationalize. The sticker was irrelevant. The SUV was a coincidence. But the memory of Clara, how she had vanished into a web of unseen predators, surged. Maya understood surveillance and targeting. Julian knew how data harvesting worked. He just hadn't considered it could be applied to human lives so overtly. He checked his internal trackers. His security detail confirmed the SUV was clean, registered to a legitimate cleaning service. Everyone, from his crew to the city system, saw only normalcy. Only Maya saw the signature of the hunters. Julian realized the full terrifying contradiction. He was supposed to be documenting the city's vulnerability, but he had become a target in a hidden operation, and the only person who recognized the danger was a child who had every reason to fear detection herself. The planned interview that night was set for a dark, isolated stretch under a bridge, a location Julian's team deemed perfect for dramatic contrast. Julian was positioned, his camera running, waiting for his subject, an elderly man named Silas. Suddenly, Maya materialized from the darkness, ignoring the risk of exposing herself. She didn't speak, didn't point. She simply grabbed the rough sleeve of Julian's coat and pulled, hard, dragging him away from the planned filming spot. Julian resisted reflexively. "Wait, I need this shot. This is essential," he hissed, worried about the audio pickup and his crew's schedule. Maya's eyes were frantic, wide with certainty. She didn't waste breath arguing. She reached into her pocket and produced a crumpled, damp piece of paper. It was a poorly drawn map, scrawled with charcoal, showing the area they were in. She jammed it into Julian's hand. On the map, marked with the exact location of the interview spot, was the stylized R symbol she had peeled off the signpost earlier. "Silas," she managed, her voice tight with terror. "He didn't show up yesterday. They mark the spots. They watch who comes back for him." The weight of her implication crashed down on Julian. This wasn't surveillance for a documentary. It was selection for predation. Silas was gone, and the interview location was a trap, a lure to identify anyone looking for the missing. Julian wasn't just observing injustice anymore. He was minutes away from being absorbed by it. The R was a silent confirmation. He was already tagged. Julian's security training kicked in. He aborted the mission in his mind. He reached for the hidden button on his watch, the emergency abort signal that would flood the area with uniformed security and shut down the operation. But before he could press it, a large, heavy hand clamped over his mouth from behind, smelling faintly of cheap sanitizer and stale tobacco. The force was immediate and overwhelming. Julian struggled, fighting the instinctive panic. He heard Maya scream, a thin, high sound of pure terror, followed by the squeal of tires. He slammed his elbow back, connecting with a rib, but two more figures emerged from the shadows. They moved with the brutal efficiency of professionals, not street thugs. They weren't robbing him, they were collecting him. The map Maya had pressed into his hand slipped and fell into a puddle, the charcoal lines blurring into black mud. As the darkness consumed him, Julian's last coherent thought was the horrifying realization. He had focused so much on documenting the forgotten that he himself had become instantly and completely forgettable. 30 minutes after Julian was dragged into the black van, the alarm finally triggered, not by Julian pressing the panic button, but by the cessation of the faint biometric pulse from his implanted earpiece. Miles away, in the sterile, soundproof command center van, Marcus Hayes, Julian's chief of security and former Special Forces operator, watched the red light flash, signifying system compromise. Marcus had already been on edge. Julian's extended silence felt wrong. Marcus knew Julian was arrogant, but he wasn't careless with protocols. Marcus had tolerated the immersion because of Clara's memory, but his gut had screamed danger since the start. He immediately checked the GPS tracker in the platinum watch casing. The signal was static, then abruptly went dark. They hadn't just lost the signal. The device had been neutralized, likely with an EMP burst, a signature move of highly organized groups. Forget the protocols. He's been compromised, Marcus barked into the mic, his calm exterior cracking. He mobilized the external response teams, bypassing the planned documentary extraction cover story. Julian Vance wasn't missing. He was taken. Marcus immediately accessed the raw footage from Julian's hidden camera's internal buffer. He fast-forwarded through the monotonous clips until he reached the crucial seconds under the bridge. He saw the child, Maya, her frantic eyes, the quick, desperate pull. Then the scuffle, the heavy hand, and the rapid degradation of the visual feed. Marcus isolated the audio. Just before the feed died, he caught a distinct rhythmic scrape. He cross-referenced the sound analysis with the city's environmental data. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy rubber boot dragging across coarse grit industrial flooring, not a van floor, but a warehouse. More importantly, Marcus remembered the cryptic detail Julian had dismissed in his internal log the previous day, a strange symbol, the stylized R inside a diamond. He ran the symbol through every intelligence database he had, linking commercial logos, organized crime cartels, and known human trafficking syndicates. It was a risk marker, used globally by a sophisticated network known as the Redemptor Group, specializing not in low-value street trade, but in kidnapping high-value targets for forced labor or organ trafficking, often targeting individuals with significant digital footprints that could be leveraged. The full, horrifying truth hit Marcus. Julian, the man who controlled digital empires, was now a commodity in an underworld market, identified, tracked, and collected. His homeless disguise hadn't protected him. It had made him easier to categorize and neutralize away from his usual defenses. Marcus didn't hesitate. He knew the police investigation would be slow and bureaucratic. Julian's life depended on immediate, unauthorized action. He punched in a private number, breaking a deep-seated non-disclosure agreement. "It's Marcus. I need a clean team, heavy reconnaissance, and every eye you have on the old dockyards, and tell them to look for the R symbol." The simulation was over. The war had just begun. Julian awoke to the suffocating smell of ozone and industrial grease. He was bound tightly with zip ties in a small, windowless concrete room. Across from him sat a thin, sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, holding Julian's platinum watch. This was not the volunteer from the food bank. "Mr. Vance," the man said, his voice smooth, almost disappointed. "Julian, we know exactly who you are. We've been tracking your movements since your team scouted this entire zone 3 weeks ago. We knew the documentary was a front." He smiled, a cold, clinical expression. "You came here looking for a problem to solve with data. You just became data." The confrontation was immediate and psychological. Julian, stripped of his authority, fought to maintain composure. "What do you want? Ransom? I can give you any number now." "Money is crude," the man replied, flicking the watch. "We deal in influence. We needed access to your network infrastructure, your server farms. Your philanthropic project gave us the perfect leverage. We need you to code a very specific backdoor, a ghost key that opens everything." Julian refused, vehemently. "I won't betray the security of Vance Global. You'll never get near the core data." The man stood, walking toward a dark corner of the room. "You misunderstand the value of leverage, Julian. We don't need to threaten your company. We need to threaten what you actually care about." He produced a worn, dirty piece of charcoal-scrawled paper, the map Maya had given Julian. "The little girl who dragged you away. Maya. She was a liability. She saw too much. We located her nest, the drainage pipe, moments after you were secured." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. Not money, not influence, but the innocent life he had inadvertently endangered. His arrogance, his belief that he could control the chaos for the sake of a film, had put Maya and Leo in lethal jeopardy. The powerful CEO was utterly helpless, facing a consequence he couldn't budget for. "If you touch the children, you get nothing," Julian managed, his voice raw. "You have 20 minutes to reconsider the code," the man stated, dropping the map onto Julian's lap, a visceral reminder of his failure. "We will start with the boy, then the girl. You can save them, Julian, or you can save your company. Which life means more to the great empathic futurist?" The mentira, that Julian was in control, that his power mattered here, crashed completely. He wasn't a hero in a documentary. He was a terrified man whose mistakes were about to cost 2 innocent lives. Julian had 20 minutes, but Marcus had only 3. The security team, operating entirely outside legal channels, breached the heavily reinforced warehouse door seconds before the timer on Julian's phone began its final countdown. Marcus and his team moved with ruthless precision, utilizing specialized non-lethal suppression rounds. The confrontation was brief, violent, and deafening. Julian's captor, realizing the infiltration, bolted, attempting to use Julian as a shield. Julian, driven by the cold fear for the children, threw his weight forward, disrupting the man's balance long enough for Marcus to close the distance. The man was taken down, his operation crippled in minutes. The aftermath was immediate and messy. Marcus found Maya and Leo deep inside the warehouse complex, terrified but physically unharmed, hidden in a storage closet that smelled of old machinery. They were frail and shocked, the cost of being targets in a system they barely understood. The price for Julian Vance was immense. The unauthorized security breach, the evidence of a sophisticated human trafficking ring operating in the city's shadow, and Julian's own documented pretense of homelessness became a massive scandal. Julian was extracted, safe, but professionally ruined. Vance Global's stock plummeted 40% in a single day as news of the chaotic raid and the true purpose of his documentary leaked. The narrative of the empathetic futurist was replaced by the image of a cynical billionaire who endangered innocence for a self-serving media project. His corporate board forced his immediate, indefinite leave of absence. His power, once absolute, evaporated in a deluge of bad press and regulatory investigations. The documentary was instantly archived, its purpose now poisoned by the reality it exposed. Julian lost his authority, his image, and perhaps irrevocably, his standing in the financial world. The justice was swift, but incomplete. Several high-level operatives of the Redemptor Group were captured, and the network suffered a severe blow. But the emotional cost was higher. Maya and Leo were taken into protective custody, separated from the only community they knew. Julian, standing in the rubble of his public life, understood the truth Maya had tried to show him. Power wasn't about control. It was about the vulnerability you chose to protect. He had failed to protect the vulnerable, and the consequences were now etched into the city's conscience and deeply into his own. 6 months later, Julian Vance was no longer a CEO. He had liquidated a substantial portion of his personal assets, not to buy back his reputation, but to establish a genuine quiet relief organization focused specifically on locating and assisting missing individuals connected to marginalized communities, the people his sister Clara had become. The organization, intentionally small and operating under Marcus's fierce non-profit security expertise, was named the Clara Project. It had no cameras, no PR strategy, and no pretense of solving the world's problems. It just located the lost. Julian's new office was a repurposed fire station, not the glittering tower he once commanded. He spent his days compiling complex, non-invasive digital profiles of missing persons, using his data expertise for true protection, not profit. He was still a man of immense resources, but his focus had shifted entirely from connection to rescue. One wet Tuesday, Marcus walked in. He didn't speak, but motioned to a small, brightly lit room near the back. Maya was sitting there, quietly sketching with new colored pencils. She was cleaner, less guarded, enrolled in a specialized foster program, but still maintaining the vigilance of the street. She looked up when Julian entered. There was no grand apology, no gesture of payment. Julian simply knelt down, holding a small, clean map of the city. He had painstakingly redrawn the blurred charcoal lines Maya had given him. "I needed this," Julian said, his voice level, "to remember where I needed to go." Maya looked at the map, then at Julian. She saw not the powerful CEO, but the man who had faced the same fear she lived with daily. She picked up a blue pencil and drew a small, crude star on the map, marking the location of the old drainage pipe. Leo's safe spot. Leo was recovering well in a specialized clinic, a fact Julian had ensured but never claimed credit for. "It's not gone," Maya said softly, referring to the darkness, "but you know where the shadows are now." Julian nodded. He had lost his empire, his public identity, and the comforting illusion of control, but he had gained a raw, functional truth. He had traded billions in abstract power for a connection to 2 lives he helped save, a redemption bought not with wealth, but with his own downfall. He had become what Maya had been all along, a sentinel in the dark, watching out for those who couldn't be seen. Dignity had returned, not through achievement, but through service. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more transformative and intense tales like this one.